הנשיא האוניברסיטה, פרופסור אריה צבן, דקן הפקולטה למדעי היהדות, ירון הראל, גם ראיתי אותו כבר, מרצים, חברי סגל, סטודנטים, אורחים יקרים, ברוכים הבאים. אנחנו התאספנו היום כדי לחגוג השקת האוסף הדיגיטלי חשוב שמר ויליאם גרוס תרם למחלקתנו, המחלקה לאומנות יהודית, ואנחנו נתחיל עם ברכות. אז אני קודם כל מזמינה את פרופסור אריה צבן, נשיא האוניברסיטה, לברך את מר גרוס ואת האורחים שלנו. אז בבקשה, פרופסור צבן.
תודה רבה. מר ויליאם גרוס, שלום. דיקן הפקולטה למדעי היהדות, פרופסור ירון הראל, ראש המחלקה לאומנות יהודית, פרופסור מרים ריינר, מרצים, חברי סגל, סטודנטים, ואורחים יקרים. אוניברסיטת בר-אילן, כמו שאתם יודעים, שמה על נס את הנושא של מצוינות אקדמית בכל תחומי המחקר, אבל אנחנו מאוד גאים על ייחודנו בתחום חקר מדעי היהדות. המחלקה לאומנות מובילה את המחקר של ביטויים אומנותיים ביהדות, לא רק בארץ, אלא גם בעולם כולו. הפעילות הזאת של מרצי המחלקה והסטודנטים הלומדים בה תלויה מאוד בחומרים טקסטואליים וחזותיים, גם בספריות וגם באוספי אומנות יהודית בארץ ומחוץ לה. אחד מאוספי האומנות היהודית הבולטים, הן בהיקף וגם בארגון ובנגישות, הוא האוסף הפרטי של ויליאם גרוס, מפעל זה שהתחיל לפני יותר מ5 עשורים, הביא חותם עמוק על המחקר ועל התרבות החזותית של העם היהודי. כאספן, אך גם כחוקר, עד כמה שהבנתי, מר גרוס שקד על איסוף וקטלוג של עשרות פריטים, שערכם האומנותי בהיסטורי של כל אחד מהם לא נופלת מחשיבותו של האוסף כולו, ומלבד כתבי היד והמגילות, האוסף כולל גם פרסומים רבים ונדירים המנתחים את היצירות השונות שיש בידיו. כל אלה הופכים אותו לאוצר תרבותי ולכלי עזר רב ערך לחוקרי האומנות, מסורת, היסטוריה ומיסטיקה יהודית. במשך שנים רבות התנהל שיתוף פעולה הדוק בין מר גרוס ובין המחלקה לאומנות יהודית. ברצון רב ובנדיבות הוא חשף את אוצרות האומנות היהודית בפני המחלקה ובפני הסטודנטים הלומדים בה. המחלקה, הבנתי, גם ארגנה סיורים על משכנו של האוסף בביתו הפרטי של מר גרוס. הוא היה עורך חשוב בכנסים מדעיים, ארציים ובינלאומיים של המחלקה. שיתוף הפעולה הזה מגיע עכשיו לשיא חדש עם מסירת האוסף הדיגיטלי המלא לידי המחלקה לאומנות יהודית, ועל כך תודתנו העמוקה. האוסף הדיגיטלי מוסיף עוד נדבך לתשתיות הידע של המחלקה, הוא מאפשר גישה מהירה ובלתי אמצעית של החוקרים והסטודנטים ליצירות, ואנחנו מודים על כך בשמחה גדולה לידידנו היקר. אני מבין שגם המחלקה תיתן מענק מחקר לדוקטורנט שיחקור את האוסף, ובכך נצליח גם לתרום חזרה למר גרוס ותרומתו הנדיבה. אני מאחל לחוקרים ולסטודנטים במחלקה לאומנות יהודית שיפיקו מהאוסף את המיטב ואת המרב, ויעזרו לנו בכך לקדם באופן משמעותי את המצוינות האקדמית שאנחנו כל כך רוצים בה, ונאמר שוב ומקרב לב תודה גדולה מאוד למר גרוס על המהלך החשוב הזה. תודה רבה.
הרבה תודות לך. מרים, רק אם אפשר, אני חושב שאת צריכה לעשות מיוט לכולם, ורק לבדת מישהו שחשוב דיבור.
זה בידי איליה, הוא יכול לעשות מיוט של כולם.
זה כן, וממשיך.
אוקיי. אז תודה רבה פרופסור צבן על הברכה היפה, ואני מזמינה עכשיו את פרופסור ירון הראל, דקן הפקולטה למדעי היהדות, לברך ולשאת דבריו. בבקשה, פרופסור הראל.
אני רוצה לראות שאני לא מושתק, רק רגע.
שומעים אותך, יופי.
שומעים, מצוין.
כן.
יפה. אז מר וויליאם גרוס, מוריי ורבותיי, אחר צהריים טובים. התכנסנו כאן היום כדי לחגוג, לא פחות מזה, את הערתו של עותק דיגיטלי של כל האוסף של מר וויליאם גרוס, הידוע יותר כביל, למחלקה לאומנות יהודית בפקולטה למדעי היהדות של אוניברסיטת בר אילן. דומה כי אין איש בעולם שעוסק בהיסטוריה יהודית, שלא לדבר על אומנות יהודית, שלא שמע על האוסף האגדתי הזה של ביל גרוס, האוסף הגדול והחשוב כל כך. במשך 56 שנה אסף ביל יצירות אומנות יהודית במרץ, במומחיות, בטעם משובח ובהמון אהבה. דורות של חוקרים, אוצרי מוזיאונים ותערוכות, ושוחרים של אומנות, תרבות והיסטוריה יהודית ברחבי העולם, נהנו מהפתיחות ורוחב הלב של ביל, שתמיד מוכן לעזור לחשוף יצירות האומנות מהאוסף שלו בפני הקהל הרחב. דורות של סטודנטים לאומנות יהודית בבר אילן ביקרו בביתו של ביל בתל אביב, התרגשו לראות מקרוב ואף לגעת בתשמישי קדושה, בספרים ישנים ובפריטים אחרים המדהימים ביופיים. גם אני זכיתי ליהנות מנדיבותו של מר גרוס, שכן בכרך סוריה, שערכתי במסגרת הסדרה של מכון בן צבי, קהילות ישראל במזרח במאות ה-19 וה-20, מופיעות תמונות של חפצים שניתנו לנו באדיבותו של מר גרוס, ואגב, אם יורשה לי, ביל, יש לך דרישת שלום חמה מנעמה קטריאלי. שאלת גורלו של האוסף הגדול של ביל גרוס הטרידה הרבה מאוד אנשים הרבה מאוד זמן. בריאיון לוויינט ספרים, בדיוק לפני 10 שנים, ב8.1.2011, נשאל ביל גרוס על ידי המראיין כהי לישנה. אז האוסף שלך יהפוך למוזיאון? וכך ענה ביל. ייתכן ויום אחד, כאשר אגיע לגן עדן, האוסף הזה יימכר. לכך השקעתי את חיי ואני אשאיר אותו למשפחה שלי. אבל לאורך כל השנים קיבלתי מהאוסף הזה סיפוק אישי, גם מבחינת הלימוד. אני תמיד אומר, כך אומר ביל, שאם עבר יום בו לא למדתי בו משהו חדש, הוא נחשב ליום אבוד. דומה כי העברת עותק דיגיטלי של כל האוסף של ביל גרוס למחלקה לאומנות יהודית, מחבר היטב את האוסף הנכון למקום הנכון. מדובר במחלקה המובילה בהוראה אקדמית ובמחקר של אומנות יהודית בארץ ובעולם, מחלקה שיש לה את כתב העת החשוב ביותר בתחום, ארס ג'ודאיקה, כתב עת אקדמי בינלאומי ששמו הולך לפניו. בשנים האחרונות המחלקה עשתה קפיצה גדולה קדימה, ועדיין לטעמי אנו בתחילת הדרך. אני מודה לך ביל גם באופן אישי, בשם המחלקה ובשם הפקולטה למדעי היהדות, ומאחל לך אריכות ימים ושנים בבריאות טובה, בקרב אוהביך ואהוביך כולם. תודה רבה.
תודה פרופסור הראל. אני ברשותכם גם אוסיף כמה מילים, אבל בנימה קצת יותר אישית, ואני אשתף אתכם את המצגת קטנה שהכנתי. אוקיי, שנייה. זהו, רק כדי להראות לכם, וסליחה על הכריכה הזו כבר מיושנת קצת, שהוצאתי אותה מהארון אתמול, שאנחנו מכירים מ-1984, שבפעם ראשונה הגעתי לבית של ביל, שנה אחרי שעליתי ארצה מיוגוסלביה דאז, ביחד עם הצוות של פרופסור ברכה יניב, שאז השתתפתי במדור לחקר בתי הכנסת ותשמישי קדושה שהיא הובילה, ובפעם ראשונה חקרתי גם את האוסף של ביל, והיה לי הזדמנות לגעת בדברים ולהתרגש מכל האירוע, שבעצם חיזק בי את הרצון להמשיך בכיוון שאני עד היום עסוקה בו. הסיפור נוסף בינינו התפתח כמה שנים אחר כך, כשהצלחתי להביא לביל מגילה מיוחדת ממשפחה, או לתווך בין משפחה שהייתה מעוניינת למכור במגילת אסתר מיוחדת הזאת, שאתם לא יודעים איזה מהם אמיתית ואיזה מהם העתק, כן, של הנרתיק למגילת אסתר, שבעצם שניהם באוסף של ביל, אחד מקורית ואחד היום בשימוש כנרתיק למגילת אסתר גם מהאוסף שלו, ואני מאוד גאה ושמחה שדווקא הוא בחר בנרתיק למגילת אסתר, אז הוא מיוחד שגם מקשר בינינו עד היום הזה. ודבר אחרון שגיליתי רק לאחרונה, ואני יודעת שהאמן קן גולדמן עכשיו איתנו, זה גם כן משהו שבא מאוסף גרוס, קמע ממאה ה-16, שפעם הייתה בשימוש להגנה נגד המגפה, והיום גם כתוצאה של אומנות יהודית עכשווית, כדי להביא לכאן ועכשיו בתקופה המסובכת שלנו, אמן קן גולדמן, אמן ידוע, מפורסם בתחום אומנות יהודית מחשבית, יצר מסכה ומקשרת את האוסף החשוב הזו לימינו. אז זהו, זה רק רציתי קצת, ממש על קצה המזלג, להוסיף גם משהו מצידי, למרות שאני לא מרצה היום, אלא מזמינה את קולגה שלי, פרופסור איליה רודוב, החוקר אומנות יהודית, ידוע בעולם, עורך ראשי של אס יודאיקה, הכתב עת שכבר הוזכר, והחבר טוב שלי. אז בבקשה איליה, אז אתה יכול להמשיך.
תודה רבה, תודה. אני גם עכשיו שיתפתי את המצגת, אני מקווה שאתם כבר רואים את האיש המוכר לכולנו. וכן, כבוד נשיא האוניברסיטה פרופסור אריה סבן, דיקן הפקולטה למדעי היהדות פרופסור ירון הראל, מרים היקרה, עמיתים, תלמידים, אורחים נכבדים, ובהתרגשות מיוחדת כמובן מר ביל גרוס היקר. זכינו במתנה נדיבה ומיוחדת באוסף דיגיטלי של משפחת גרוס, ובמעמד זה רציתי לחלוק אתכם כמה מחשבות על ייחודיות של אוסף זה ושל כל מפעל האספנות של אומנות יהודית שאותו מקיים ביל גרוס כבר 56 שנים. לאספנות פנים רבות, אוספים של פריטים כיצירות אומנות ולא דברי ערך בלבד, ידועים לנו עוד מיוון העתיקה לפחות. משלהי התרבות האירופית והאירופוצנטרית ועד ימינו בכל העולם, אוספי אומנות הם עניין של פרסטיג'ה, שמירת אוצרות והשקעה כספית בטוחה. אבל מעבר לערך החומרי של יצירות, מאחורי האוסף מזמן עמד מניע של סקרנות. בין אבות המוזיאונים המודרניים היו האוספים שנקראו וונדרקאמרן, חדרי הפלאות. אלה היו אוספים אנציקלופדיים שסיפקו סקרנות אנושית ועזרו רבות לפיתוח מדעים. אוסף גרוס הוא חדר הפלאות של העולם היהודי. תשמישי קדושה ומצווה מבית הכנסת ומהבית היהודי, ספרים, גלויות, דפים מודפסים למיניהם, קמעות, אילנות קבליים, והרשימה עוד ארוכה. כל חפץ ישן, אני עכשיו אעבור לתמונה הבאה, שאנחנו נראה עכשיו כאן את החפצים האלה, כל חפץ ישן אינו שריד ועד לחיים שחלפו. שנייה, אני ביד אחד גם מנהל כאן את הפגישה. אוסף חפצים מקפיא את הזמן ומאפשר לאספן לגעת בהיסטוריה מגע פיזי ממשי. יש להדגיש במיוחד, ביל גרוס הוא אספן שמאפשר גם לרבים אחרים להרגיש את המגע הישיר של היסטוריה, ובזה אנחנו זכינו כאן באחד השיעורים שאנחנו העברנו פשוט בביתו. התלהבות ממעשה ידיהם של אומנים ואומנים, והסקרנות לכל חפץ בפרט ולחיים בכלל, עומדים גם מאחורי הידע העצום של ביל גרוס בתרבות החזותית של עדות ישראל בתקופות שונות ובמקומות שונים. הסקרנות הבלתי נלאית של ביל גרוס לאיסוף דברים דומים ושונים ביחד, הפכה תחביב רגיל של ילד, מי מאיתנו לא אסף משהו בילדות, למפעל חיים בעל חשיבות בינלאומית. האספנות שמונעת בכוח של סקרנות שואפת לשמר את המגוון והשלמות של החיים החולפים. הדבר המדהים בהשגת השלמות באוסף זה בא לידי ביטוי באוסף הקטלוגים של ביל גרוס, אני עכשיו חוזר לתמונה הזאת, הנה כאן, ויתרה מזו, בהוצאה לאור של קטלוג הקטלוגים. פרסום הרשומות על 2,264 קטלוגים, מהראשון שביניהם, משנת 1876, ועד אלה שיצאו לאור לפני כשנתיים. העושר ומגוון הפריטים מעלה את אוסף גרוס לרמה של אוספי האמנות היהודית המסורתית במוזיאונים גדולים. אמנם נותרו לא הרבה תצוגות מוזיאליות שמטרתם להקיף את השלמות והמגוון של החיים. מוזיאון נחשבי בוחר בדרך כלל יצירות וחפצים בחירה בוררנית כדי באמצעותם לספר סיפור, צריך להגיד נרטיב ולא סיפור כאן, סיפור מוגדר מראש. אתוודה, אני אוהב את הקסם של עולמות המוזיאונים העמוסים במושגים דומים. עכשיו אראה כאן אחד מאלה, כן, כמו למשל כאן מה שאתם רואים, מוזיאון של ויקטוריה אנד אלברט בלונדון. לסוג זה של חפץ שיש שם גם מגוון וגם שלמות, שהיה גם אוסף שיש לו גם מגוון וגם שלמות, שהיה גם אוסף של ביל גרוס. זה אוסף שלא מגדיר לנו סיפור אחד, אלא שדורש מאיתנו מאמץ תמידי לחבר נקודות, לחפש נקודות, לחבר נקודות ולסרטט קווים של היסטוריה. יתרה מזו, מגוון יצירות דומות מחדד את התובנה שמה שידוע לנו זה רק מה ששרד. אני רוצה להראות כאן את המגוון והשלמות. הנה כאן תסתכלו כמה יש לנו כאן חפצים, זה רק חלק מהאוסף הדיגיטלי, כמה יש לנו כאן חפצים דומים שהם שונים במקצת. וכל זה בעצם בא מאותו האוסף. אז מגוון יצירות, שנייה, במבט לאחור לשנות האספנות הרבות של ביל גרוס, אין ספק שפעילותו היא גם שליחות למען שימור, מחקר והפצת ידע על התרבות היהודית החזותית היוצאת מן הכלל. לא ניתן לספור מחקרים, פרסומים מדעיים, תערוכות, תוכניות טלוויזיה וכתבות בעיתונות שניזונו מהידע העמוק של ביל גרוס, ממגוון ומהעושר של האוסף, ומעל הכל מהסברת הפנים וחום הנפש שלו. עלינו להמשיך ולפתח את המחקר והפצת הידע עם העותק הדיגיטלי של האוסף שיש עכשיו כאן לפנינו. אני רק רוצה כאן להראות עוד פרסום אחד שהוא יצא לאור ממש לא מזמן, ואנחנו עכשיו גאים לפרסם גם ביקורת על הספר הזה בחוברת הקרובה של ארס יודאיקה. לזה אני גם אוסיף שביל גרוס היה אחד מהיוזמים והאבות של ארס יודאיקה, ואני שמח לראות כאן גם את המחברים של הקובץ הזה, ומחברים רבים שכתבו לארס יודאיקה, וכמובן לא רואה עכשיו על המסך, אבל ראיתי אותה כאן, וכמובן את פרופסור ברכה יניב, שהייתה המייסדת והעורכת שנים רבות של כתב העת ארס יודאיקה. וזה רק במקצת מה שאנחנו יכולים להגיד. אני חושב שאפשר לאסוף עוד ספרייה גדולה של ספרים, מאמרים, שבהם יש אזכורים שונים ותמונות מהאוסף. בקטלוגים של ביל אני שמח לראות גם קטלוגים של תערוכות של מרכז ליבר במחלקה של אמנות יהודית באוניברסיטת בר-אילן. כלומר, אנחנו כאן נכנסנו להיסטוריה תודות לך. ועכשיו באמת אנחנו חושבים שהגיע הזמן גם לעשות משהו מצדנו, וכאן אני מתכבד להודיע שמרכז ליבר מצא מענק מחקר לדוקטורנט חדש במחלקה שמחקרו יוקדש ליצירות מאוסף משפחת גרוס או לפעילותו של מר וילם גרוס. תודה רבה, ואנחנו נרשם את כל קורא למענק מחקר הזה ונפרסם אותו באינטרנט, אז כל המעוניין בכך יוכל שם ללמוד את הפרטים. תודה רבה.
אז אני אציג את דוקטור צבי ארגד, הוא הדור הצעיר של המחלקה שלנו, שממשיך בדרכנו, עוסק באמנות יהודית בכל מיני גווניה, אבל כעיקר אמנות בתי הכנסת, איקונוגרפיה יהודית, סמיוטיקה, הוא תלמיד דוקטורט לשעבר של פרופסור איליה רודוב, אז אנחנו מאוד גאים שיש לנו במחלקה כבר צאצאים שלנו, כן, הדור הבא שימשיך יום אחד לעסוק בתחום. אז בבקשה, דוקטור ארגד, המיקרופון שלך.
תודה רבה. מר ויליאם גרוס, נשיא האוניברסיטה, פרופסור אריה צבן, דיקן הפקולטה למדעי היהדות, פרופסור ירון הראל, ראש המחלקה לאמנות יהודית, פרופסור מירן ריינר, מרצים, סטודנטים ואורחים יקרים. היום אנחנו מניחים את אבן הפינה הדיגיטלית, או אם תרצו, גוזרים את הסרט הדיגיטלי של אוסף התמונות היהודית של ביל גרוס, שהוא תרם בנדיבותו למחלקה לאמנות יהודית. האוסף הדיגיטלי שאנחנו משיקים היום כולל תחומים שונים של אמנות יהודית. אני רוצה להתייחס להוראה של אחד מהמושמצים ביותר שבהם, שזה תשמישי הקדושה. בניגוד לכתבי יד למשל, תשמישי הקדושה, או כמו שהם נקראו בזלזול, יודאיקה, זכו בעבר לתדמית של חפצים על גבול הקיץ' או מעבר לו, שמבלים את רוב זמנם במזנונים של סבתות ודודות, לצד תמונות של הילד הבוכה ואבני קריסטל, ויסלחו לי חוקרי אבני הקריסטל. והשינוי ביחס של מחקר האומנות היהודית לתשמישי הקדושה, הוא נבע בין השאר מההיכרות איתם באוספים כמו זה של ביל גרוס, שהשאיל בשמחה פריטים למוזיאונים ולתערוכות. חוקרים כמו פרופסור ברכה יניב חקרו ולימדו על תשמישי הקדושה, וככה הם העבירו אותם לצד המואר של חקר האומנות היהודית. ברכה ומרצים אחרים במחלקה לאומנות יהודית קיימו סיורים באוסף של ביל, שבהם הפגישו את הסטודנטים במחלקה, ואני אחד מהם, באופן בלתי אמצעי עם תשמישי הקדושה ומוצגים אחרים באוסף. ואני חייב להגיד שזכור לי מהביקור, מהסיור שהייתי, שזה כמו לקחת ילד לחנות ממתקים, אתה לא יודע מאיפה להתחיל. אז כדי להמשיך במגמה הלימודית הבלתי אמצעית הזאת, אנחנו זקוקים לחומרים ויזואליים שיהיו זמינים ומזמינים עבור הסטודנטים שלנו. ובחודשים האחרונים נוכחנו לדעת כמה חשובה והכרחית אפילו הגישה הדיגיטלית לחומרי המחקר וההוראה שבהם תלוי תחום הדעת שלנו. לכן החשיבות של האוסף הדיגיטלי של ביל גרוס רבה כל כך עבור הפעילות הלימודית במחלקה. זמינות במקרה הזה היא המפתח לעניין שהוא המניע להוראה ולמחקר. חומרי האוסף ישמשו לשני סוגים עיקריים של פעילויות לימודיות אצלנו במחלקה. נשלב אותם בשיעורים ובמצגות שניתנים לסטודנטים, וככה נעשיר את מגוון הדוגמאות שנציג לפניהם, ונאפשר להם להשתמש בתמונות מהאוסף בעצמם לצורך כתיבת מחקרים עצמאיים. אני בטוח שנשכיל להשתמש באוסף הנהדר שניתן לנו לצורך קידום ההוראה במחלקה לאומנות יהודית, ומודה לביל על הנדיבות הרבה שהוא הפגין כלפי המחלקה, גם בעבר וגם עכשיו בתרומת האוסף הדיגיטלי. תודה.
אוקיי, קצר לעניין. תודה רבה צבי. And now we're switching to English part, right, Bill? Now it's your turn, and I must say I'm very happy to see many people we know, friends from all over the world, from Poland to England, and I feel almost as that we are having one of our congresses, international congresses, which suddenly I think maybe we should organize on Zoom because everybody is here. So Bill, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Yofi. Okay. Are we there?
Yes, we can see your
Okay.
presentation. It's fine.
יופי. קודם כל אני רוצה לבקש סליחה מהדוברי עברית. יש שתי סיבות. אחד, בדרך כלל אני מדבר על אובייקטים מהאוסף. לא יודע, זה יותר קל בעברית, אבל היום אני מדבר באופן אישי הרבה, והאוצר מילים באנגלית הרבה יותר גדול לדאבוני הרב, גם אחרי 50 שנה, ואני הזמנתי גם חברים מחוץ לארץ, אז תסלחו לי. I'm really grateful to Bar-Ilan University, both for the hosting of so many images and for offering them on their site to advance scholarship. I also thank them for the opportunity to speak with all of you. In almost all my other lectures, I'm dealing with objects. And in those lectures, there are a lot of images of items. That won't be the case today, because here I hope to give some idea of what has formed my relationship with the collection and the subject of Judaica and who I am as a collector. Okay, what is going on here? 1 second. Okay. Let's start at the end of the story, where I find myself before you today, the luckiest and surely happiest man in the world. I live with Lisa, supportive, loving, and I might add, my resident gourmet chef. Our beautiful apartment is filled with items from the collection, and Lisa really tolerates this. I don't think many wives would, and it makes a huge difference in my life. An equal partner with the collection of objects is a large library of both antique Hebrew books, printed and with visual elements and manuscripts, and a very large reference library, today comprising well over 15,000 books, brochures, and offprints. Even during the pandemic, I must tell you, I have not had a moment's boredom. Downstairs, I have my office and storage space, and as you can see on the left, my own private stacks, and I dare say there are a few people who have that privilege at home. For me, the provision of these tens of thousands of images is really a natural and reasonable act. After all, I still have the originals in my own computer, and ultimately, I am the beneficiary. There will be research by scholars that will reveal discoveries that add meaning to objects that I've been collecting for 60 years. The donation is a result of a philosophy that has evolved during my entire life. There was no difficult decision involved. I received a request and said yes. The placement of the image is particularly important today because Bar-Ilan is the only place in Israel and the world where Jewish art is taught in an organized university framework, and that under the able leadership of Dr. Ilya Rodov, Miriam, and Zvi. Today is another milestone in the evolution of my life in Judaica. It's also an evolution personally. This is to show that, yes, I did once have hair, and even black hair. As recorded in a book my mother of blessed memory kept about the development of each of her 5 children, I began collecting things and trying to arrange them in some order at the age of 6, and this has never ceased. As a child, these objects included playing cards, matchbooks, political buttons, cards of various subjects that came with chewing gum, small soaps from hotels, etc., etc. As I matured, Judaism as a civilization became more and more a central theme in my life. I was raised in a home in which Jewish culture was dominant. We were members of a conservative congregation. Synagogue was a part of our life on Shabbat and holidays. I met my wife, Lisa, at the age of 16 in a summer camp sponsored by the conservative movement. After my studies, we moved to Chicago, where I began working for my father-in-law and was often in New York. During one of these visits, while walking on 57th Street, I saw a store called Cepelia, which imported all sorts of handcrafts from Poland. And in the window was standing this book. I was absolutely dumbfounded. I'd never seen a synagogue even remotely similar in style. On the cover was pictured a building that seemed to me designed after the multi-layered roofs of a pagoda in the East. It fascinated me. I bought the book, of course, wanted to do more research, using the extensive bibliography at the end of the book to search for other items. So it's something that I think none of you knew. My career in Judaica really began with an interest in and collecting books about synagogue architecture. But it was really in my relationship with my father-in-law, Maurice Spertus, that the subject of Judaica truly began to play a major role. Maurice was one of that generation of extraordinary Eastern European Jews who emigrated to the States during the first years of the 20th century. He was a giant of a man in business, philanthropy, and deep thinking on almost any subject imaginable. As many of you know, Maurice was a major collector of Judaica, whose collection today constitutes the Maurice Spertus Museum of Judaica in Chicago. He was a second father to me, and through his activity, I entered a magic world. In 1964, he called me into his office, introduced me to a taxi driver who in his quiet periods would go to antique stores and try to find Judaica for Maurice, and showed me what he had brought to him that morning and encouraged me to purchase it. And for the monumental sum of $15, this small and rather modest object propelled me into a new world that in many ways determined my future. I took it home, examined it, and realized that I knew absolutely nothing at all about it, not where it was from, when it was created, and who might have fashioned it, under what circumstances. And with that, 2 streams of my life met to create a river, the increasingly intensive core of my Jewish identity and my passion for collecting. I realized then that I had no business purchasing objects without any knowledge, and decided to try and build a reference library which would help educate me. And for 4 years, I concentrated on that goal alone before I purchased my second object. The search for books itself became a major passion that has remained until today. And my Judaica reference library contains more than 15,000 books, catalogs, journals, brochures, and offprints. The assembling of the library was a major influence for me, for the pleasure of the search, of course, but also for numerous people who I was in contact and who were immensely helpful to me. The library began with the synagogue architecture volumes, and I then read in a Jewish newspaper an article about a major Jewish exhibition that had just opened in 1963. I wrote to the museum and ordered the catalog directly during the time of the exhibition. When it finally arrived, I discovered bibliographical references throughout, and with that, I began the race. Each subsequent book revealed more references. I began to discover Jewish book dealers whose names deserve to be remembered even if their businesses no longer exist. Levin in Copenhagen, Pompierre Verald in Emmering in Amsterdam, Rosenthal in Oxford, Hirschler and Shapiro Valentine in London, Feldheim in New York, Yakov Tversky and Wiluzhansky in Tel Aviv, Reinhardt in Bielefeld. There were many others. All of them helped me. No internet then. I had to wait to receive their printed catalogs, often mimeographed, to see offers of interest. It was often very frustrating. Today, one could go to a mega site and see offerings of literally millions of books at the touch of a button. Lisa reminds me how I would sit in the evenings with a typewriter and compose 5 to 10 letters seeking books and advice. And I sent these with stamps by snail mail. Amazing, no? I discovered and corresponded with people then in the field who were without exception the most friendly and helpful that I could wish for. Dealers, museum curators, and academics. One of the first was Rachel Vishnitzer, the doyenne of Jewish art scholars. I wrote to her as a young man of 24 in 1965, when she was already 80 years old. Yet this great scholar took time to help me, sending me off prints of her work, offering me advice. She wrote her first article about Jewish art while she was still in Russia in 1908. Her last printed article appeared in 1988, an unprecedented scholarly record of 80 years. Shalom Savar recently found her archive online and discovered copies of our correspondence then from the 60s. I bring this to your attention only to emphasize the help that I received from so many people already established in the field and how that shaped my own attitude to the subject of help and sharing in addition to the knowledge I acquired. Of course, my father-in-law, who was an inspiration in numerous ways in shaping my attitude toward objects and my philosophy of collecting. My closest friend, Dr. Al Moldovan of New York, Zichrono Livracha. We met at the beginning of both our careers in Judaica in the middle of the 60s. We met hundreds of times, and every time included exchanges about our beloved interest. His knowledge and understanding were prodigious. Ludwig Rosenberger, a German emigre, a true intellectual, and the finest bibliophile I've ever met. His subject was the Jewish experience in German culture. His unequaled library is now an important separate collection at the University of Chicago. He shared with me sources and introduced me to the finer aspects of bibliophilia. An amazing, amazing, generous man. Professor Joseph Gutmann, also of German origin, was a professor of art history at Wayne University in Detroit. He was truly one of the pioneers in the field of Judaica. Earlier, he'd worked at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, writing about their superb collection. There's virtually no subject in the field about which he did not write and offer original insights as well. He was extremely gracious to me, corresponding and even visiting me in Chicago. Dina Abramovitz, the legendary librarian YIVO for many decades, was a mentor and support from the time I met her in 1960. She guided me in assembling my library and sent me items that she recommended. A fine German scholar, Mr. Rosenberg, who escaped from Germany and with several other learned individuals, served in the Jewish Museum in New York. He was always free with advice and introduced me to the reference library at the museum, where I found a number of rare items, which I then sought to include in my own library. Victor Klogsbald, whom I met in 1966, and with whom I became a close friend. We not only shared our passion for Jewish art, which we discussed on every visit of mine to Paris or him to Israel, but did business together during the time I was working in diamonds. Again, I give these details about the help and friendship to explain the examples by which I tried to live afterwards in my own attitude to everyone I met in Jewish art. Much to my sorrow, all the people that I've mentioned previously are no longer with us, but they remain in my memory as if I saw them yesterday. In 1967, a blessed event, Mayer's Bibliography of Jewish Art appeared. Over 3,000 listings of books and articles and references to Jewish art. That, of course, provided me alive, and as you can see from the sample 2 pages, I used it prodigiously, marking those books that I already had, making comments where I found something, a mistake, or something that had to be added as well. And I managed a card file of all new things, intending at some point to put out a new version of his book, which unfortunately I never got to. Today, it would be 10 to 15,000 entries at a minimum. After we made Aliyah, the help of people here in Israel and abroad was very influential for me. And to list them all would extend the presentation by many hours, but I'm sure many are on the webinar today. But I have to remember Rafi Grafman of blessed memory, with whom I spoke almost every day, and Professor Tzali Narkis, whom I first met in 1964, and who served as my teacher, friend, and colleague for decades. Laila Avron, with whom I shared from the 60s until her untimely passing. Shalom Savar, who is blessedly still with us, may he live to 120, by which time the bibliography of his works will list close to 1,000 entries, I'm sure. Bracha Yaniv, a true educator. I've worked for decades with Felicia Hyman Jelinek on multiple projects, as well as close collaboration with Emil Shriver, who originally came to me as a young student 30 years ago. For all of you watching, to whom I'm also in debt for both friendship and scholarship, forgive me for not mentioning each and every one of you. You all know exactly who you are, but all of you have brought me to this day. The decade after our Aliyah was a quiet period in my Judaica activities. We were busy dealing with the issues of klita, of being absorbed in the country, and raising our young children. It was not always easy to find my economic way in this country. But finally, from 1979 onwards, I could spend more time, effort, and funds in a renewed passion for Jewish art, both for expanding activity with objects and in pursuing my vision with a continued interest in books. It was only at the end of the 70s that I first dared to write something for publication. Tzali included it in the Journal of Jewish Art, then in its 6th volume from 1978. This was the catalog of catalogs, a very simple bibliographical list of 100 years of documented exhibitions containing items of Judaica. There were 339 catalogs documented. I never stopped collecting these catalogs. And the last year, Brill published this newest version of the listing, now containing 2,264 items, as you heard before, and with 120 pages of indices. Without the years of hard and detailed work by Orly Tzion and the sage advice and editing of Professor Falk Wiesemann from Dusseldorf, with whom I've worked on multiple projects, this dream of 40 years would have remained only that. And you can see on the left upper part, the books that went into this catalog of catalogs. In the middle, the cover, which you've already seen. And the bottom, which was a result of a celebration that Orly staged for us, inviting us to her house for dinner and presenting us for dessert this cake, a takeoff on the catalog of catalogs itself as the cake of cakes. Only Orly has that kind of humor, which he was made it a delight to work with her for all those years. During the 80s, the collection grew substantially, as did my participation in Jewish art events, such as exhibitions and conferences. It was also the period that my approach and philosophy became more defined. I always wanted to form a collection in a methodical, museological manner. I had decided that I wished to present through the collection aspects of Jewish culture and life from all the geographical areas in which Jews were dispersed throughout the world. And so, even in my home, the objects I displayed were in a manner that I defined as a cultural geographic context. I attempted not to buy serendipitously, but rather according to a picture I had in my mind as to what each cultural area should contain. I tried to acquire representative examples of each major Jewish object from synagogue and home for each area, and I attempted to fill in spaces of what was missing. As I did this and looked at each display of a particular place, I became more and more aware of what today is an obvious fact. There are Jewish forms, styles, but there is no Jewish style, excuse me. I became more and more cognizant about each group, and the individual objects within those groups began to tell a story. I tried in a way to memorialize this with a beginning philosophy that I repeated much too often, I'm sure, that I termed the William Gross window theory of Judaica. Simply put, it means that every object is a window through which one can observe period, place, and context about the life of Jews. In other words, Judaica objects are not art objects. They can be also this, but principally they are documents of Jewish life and history and tell particularly important stories. They are no different than the archival documents on paper and parchment, printed and written. Yet they are mostly ignored by academic historians who live in archives of paper and parchment. Truthfully, that drives me crazy. Outside of Professors Richie Cohen and Elliot Horowitz, Zal, objects remain dormant for academic historians. In 1991, another important event occurred in my life. I was invited to take part in a preliminary survey of Jewish sites and objects that remained in the Ukraine and Russia with Professors Sally Narkis and Aliza Cohen-Mushlin. I traveled for 5 weeks, accompanied by young Jewish activist historians from Russia and the Ukraine, to visit many of the places that they had explored in summer expeditions. Several of these scholars have since made Aliyah and are a part of the foundation of the field of Jewish art in Israel today, such as Vladimir Levin and Sergei Krovtsev of the Center for Jewish Art. Those visits to mostly abandoned, deteriorating, but extant synagogues and overgrown cemeteries, replete with headstones carrying the most exquisite carvings of Hebrew letters and Jewish symbols. These sites made an impression on me that has never left my mind or my heart. From all the more of 100 trips abroad that I've made, this is still the most exciting and memorable one. The visits to the newly reassembled Goldstein collection in Lviv and the incredible collection of precious Jewish objects in the Great Lavra in Kiev were unforgettable and focused an interest for me on the Jewish art heritage of Eastern Europe Jews that remains with me. A number of people that I met then also have remained good friends and often still active colleagues, and have since visited our home. Here, for instance, are Tanya Romanovskaya from the Great Lavra collection with her restorer colleague, who was absolutely the most incredible restorer I've ever met. From my dear father-in-law, I learned that the most important aspect of Judaica, beyond the object itself, has to do with education. I tried to put this into action as best I could. I invited all classes dealing with Jewish art from the Hebrew University in Bar-Ilan to come to my house to visit. It always bothered me that these students were learning about three-dimensional objects by seeing pictures in books, slides in classrooms, and objects behind glass in museums. For every person or group that would visit me in my home, I would open the display cases, remove objects from them, give them in their hands to touch and handle, to get a physical sense of them. This physical contact, in many ways, to me, is more important than just seeing the object as an art object. Groups from other institutions found their way to my door as well. I began to lecture more and particularly began to work closely with museums in the world to display items from the Gross family collection. I love the idea that these objects would be seen and would hopefully stimulate the observers to think about them and their context. These are catalogs, for instance, a few from Israel, from the Israel Museum, from the Bible Lands Museum, from the Haaretz Eretz Israel Museum, Beit HaTfutzot, the Museum of Islam. I tried to work with everybody and thank God found them incredibly responsive. Up until today, the collection has been represented in more than 175 exhibitions in Israel, Europe, and the United States. The several museums interested in Judaica have been wonderful partners for me. Museums from abroad also took a part. The wonderful trips that we have made to visit these exhibits abroad in Europe and America, where collection objects were presented, were not only about the exhibits, but equally about the friends that I made with so many of the museum staff, and with whom I came in contact, and with whom in many cases I remained very much in contact, both professionally and socially. In addition, there came a period starting in the 90s when the collection became comprehensive enough to allow exhibitions where the exhibits would be almost solely from the Gross family collection. There have been a number of such over the past 20 years, a few of which you see here. Some were very special. This one involved a Torah decoration set that came together over a period of 150 years. It includes a Torah shield from 1637, renovated in 1802. It turned out that not only were these items significant in terms of the Jewish community of Emden, but they are also the most substantial remaining examples of work from Emden silversmiths altogether. The Emden municipality exhibited the items for 3 months, and in 1992 of the summer, they attracted 30,000 visitors, which is quite extraordinary. I've long known of the existence of a highly unusual group of 7 spice towers that were made from filigree silver technique, fired enamel panels, and set colored stones and glass. They were all in public institutions. They were all considered to be the most prized Judaica objects. I think somebody is not muted, and it's a bother. Each museum assigned a different place of origin to its tower. By chance, I discovered an 8th one in a private collection. After a full 1.5 years of negotiation, I managed to purchase the tower and promised the original owners that I would do the research to determine the true origin and that their name would appear when the item was finally publicized. It required 3 years of research, travel to each one of the museums that held the treasures. Through the publication of a doctoral thesis about Schwäbisch Gmünd silversmiths, it became apparent that that is where these towers were from. It is a German town about 50 kilometers from Stuttgart. And one can see certainly some influence in the local style. The famous towers on the city wall of Schwäbisch Gmünd also appeared in the style of these things. I just got an email 2 weeks ago from the widow of the collector of this, and she said she was looking again through the catalog and was proud to see that their name was mentioned as the source of this into my collection. I looked up the town and discovered that there was a museum located there. I called and asked to speak with the director, who got very excited when I told her what I had. So much so that 2 days later, tower in hand, I flew to Germany and drove to Schwäbisch Gmünd to meet with Dr. Gabriel Hulthuis, the museum director. After 15 minutes of talking, she proposed that we do an exhibit. For those of you who have ever dealt with museums, you know that no museum decides after 15 minutes to do an exhibit. The exhibition was there, very successful, traveled to Vienna, and then to the Israel Museum. Wait a minute, excuse me. And you can see the catalog, main catalog from Schwäbisch Gmünd on the left, and the two smaller catalogs that were published in Vienna and in the Israel Museum. A major subject in my collection involves Kabbalah and Jewish amulets. These items have become immensely popular with the public, and over the last decade, several exhibitions about Kabbalah have been made. Most of the items exhibited were chosen from the 2,400 Kabbalistic items in my collection. And there's a reason for it. They really are incredibly attractive and interesting. These are just a sample of some metal amulets. These are samples of some manuscript and printed amulets. The idea of mysticism seems to attract people. It obviously does that for me, and I'm ecstatic to present this material to others. I would suppose that there are a few people listening right now who would admit to believing in amulets. But let's look at this exhibition called Lots of Luck, held in the Philistine Museum in Ashdod in 2013. During that time, tension arose between Israel and Gaza, and rockets were launched into Israel. One of these Katyushot fell a few meters from the museum, and shrapnel from the explosion hit and penetrated the back wall. Guess what was on the inner surface of that wall? Yes, indeed, framed amulets from the Gross family collection. And what you see is only a small part hung on a wall that extended another 50 feet, full of holes, full of framed amulets. In spite of all the shrapnel holes in the wall, not a single framed work was damaged. Serendipity? Fate? Intervention by the mysterious forces of nature? I don't know, but it was really impressive. And to be there and see it and photograph it was a joy. I've always felt that exhibitions are a huge opportunity for educational effort, and I'm always delighted to participate. Another aspect of what I found to be educational work presented itself in my local conservative synagogue. I began to work with Rabbi David Lazar, at first bringing every week a different yad to be used in reading the Torah. After the reading, I would give a short talk about the Jewish history of the place where the yad had been created. That developed into a more extensive program involving the B'nai Mitzvah, the Bar Mitzvah boys and the Bat Mitzvah girls. I would interview the families a couple of weeks prior to the ceremony and record the names of the countries and cities from which the two sides of the family originated. I would then pick out from my collection a pair of Torah finials, a Torah shield, a yad, and a Kiddush cup from these locations. The objects would be used by the child in the ceremony. I would prepare a small brochure that held images of the ritual objects and old postcard images of the synagogues that were in those cities and countries. This was presented to the child along with a short talk about the importance of roots and what the objects represented. Quote, to know where you are going, you have to know from where you come. And I can only tell you why the families loved it. I could see the eyes glaze over of almost every B'nai Mitzvah child who stood before me. From the beginning of my collection, I felt that basic documentation was the first step after acquisition, including photography. And over this time, activity accumulated to where today I have over 60,000 images, including, for example, an image of every page of 320 codex manuscripts in the collection. These will all be in the Bar-Ilan database. I decided early on that I would make these available to anybody and everyone, scholars, institutions such as museums, publishers, scholars, and private individuals. They've been used in many, many hundreds of catalogs, books, and journals. But I'm proudest of the use by scholars who find them useful in their research. The National Library has seemed to me to be sort of a second home. From the purchase of my first manuscript, I've brought all acquisitions of this genre to the library for copying and use in the Department of Photograph Manuscripts. An incredible project started by David Ben-Gurion at the beginning of the 1950s to have a copy of every extant manuscript in Hebrew letters in the world available to researchers who could sit in one room at the library and have access to all of them. Today, all of this is even online. When they decided to make an online site, for instance, of their fabulous collection of Ketubot, I immediately gave them my 300 images and helped them find other private collections in the world for inclusion, convincing those collectors that it was worthwhile. From the 90s onward, I began to give advice to collectors, dealers, and museums about the Jewish items in their collections. I hope I was useful to them, but they were immensely useful to me. To be able to see and handle thousands of Judaica items, one by one, was an exceptional privilege. I've always been most interested in the documentation process for the collection. I purchased my first computer in the 80s. It was an Olivetti with a fluorescent green screen, for those of you who remember such things. And the thrill of the time was this incredible game of Pong, which had a ball bouncing between the two sides of the screen. But the possibilities were clear even then, even if it did take a lot of time to develop. There was a time during which any institution that wanted to have a program for collection management had to prepare their own with their own programmers. There was no standard program on the market, except for one that had been developed for art galleries, only for Apple computers. My younger brother, Jonathan, is a computer scientist. He warned me to use only an open system such as Windows. Since there was no program for Windows available, I convinced him that we should develop a Windows system for collection management. That was an interesting project. I learned a lot. After a year's worth of work using programmers in Moscow, we launched it and attended a couple of museum technology exhibitions in America. The system was quite good, but it quickly became apparent that no one was interested unless there was a whole infrastructure of support mechanisms behind the product. Neither of us were interested in building a business. So at the exhibition, our booth was next to the Apple program maker called Gallery Systems. At the second show, the owner told me they were developing their own program for Windows. They had the infrastructure, and I decided to go with them. And I was among their very first Windows customers, who number almost 1,000 today. I've worked with them to this day almost 30 years, and I really am indebted to them, as their program and constant upgrades were exactly what enabled me to control and even understand my large collection, including thousands of postcards and Hebrew books. I decided from the very beginning that the visual elements were of primary importance for me. I am not a Talmid Chacham. I have no background in Jewish sources. I never attended yeshiva. Believe me, my Hebrew school and Sunday school education did not include those sorts of things. So I decided to concentrate on the visual and its relationship to Jewish culture. So along with a subject index for the items in the collection, I created an iconographic index of visual elements for each item. As an example, if I ask the computer to show me items that contain images of the zodiac, there pop up on the screen the data entry sheets of 184 items. Instantly, I don't have to go through anything to look for them. If I wish to see items that have the image of unicorns, I receive 30 items. It's an incredible tool and it enables me to communicate with any inquiry. To share the collection, though, I needed some method of sending information. In the early 90s, the photography of the collection was done in black and white. So I would write a short note and with the essential details on a piece of paper, place it with the photograph on a Xerox machine and produce the image such as the one you see above and send it by mail to the person who inquired about it. Neither elegant nor efficient, Gallery Systems had a wonderful way of eventually making what I now call an info page in the images below. So you can see the same object as to what I sent out in the beginning of the 90s and what I can send out to people today. It made life very easy for museums, as they didn't even have to come to me to choose items, but could pick them from what I sent to them. I'm sure that that is one of the reasons that the collection has been so present at exhibits. I've made it easy for them. High-res images, all basic facts, along with whatever written research I've already done. For better or for worse, theft is also a part of the art world. I know. I've always been particularly disturbed by the theft of Judaica. It always seemed to me to be some kind of sacrilege, more in a cultural sense than a religious one. But the thefts are often from a synagogue, and so the second kind is relevant as well. During the 80s and forward, I was called several times to the police to help them identify Jewish objects that would turn up in their stations as stolen goods. The same thing happened in 1994. When I was able to identify a particularly elegant, absolutely one-of-a-kind Torah crown from Bratislava. I knew that the collection of the community had been stolen some months before, and someone had sent me a list with dimensions and identifying characteristics. The police asked me if I would serve as an expert witness in their court case against the suspected thief. Apparently that notice got to the dealer, and I began to get threatening phone calls, warning me not to appear in court, or there would, quote, be a price to pay. I appeared in court anyway, being young and reckless, and tried to convince a judge that the crown in court and that listed on the inventory were one and the same, and it had to be returned to the community in Bratislava. But there was a 0.3 centimeter difference in the height, as the court measured it and as was listed on the inventory sheet. And on that basis, even though the description was clearly this crown, the judge said he had no choice but to return it to the dealer, because if there was that 0.3 difference in dimensions, even though all of us know measuring is never that accurate, it went back to the dealer. 2 weeks later, at night while we were sleeping, thieves entered our apartment through the upper floor window. When we awoke in the morning, many Judaica objects were missing. I immediately felt that this was connected to the price to be paid phone calls and began to work. We immediately called the police. A group came to the house, and one of the policemen who came was an American immigrant. And he took me aside and he said, "You seem to me to be a good guy, Bill. If you want to see your items again in your showcases, you'll have to do it yourself. Don't depend on us." And that is what I did. I took his advice. Here you see the report in one of the main Israeli newspapers, Yediot Achronot. The police delayed the publication of the theft by 1 week in order to be able to work not under pressure. And as you can see below, the English translation of the headline is 44 items of Judaica worth 2 million shekels stolen from a collector's home in Nave Avivi. Now, as far as I know, I'm the only collector in Nave Avivi. And the opening of the article says, the crime reporter wrote, there was this robbery of 2 million shekels worth of Judaica from Yehuda Nasi, 45 from the 8th floor, and there are still hundreds of items on the shelves in the living room. It was really wonderful. I called him, of course, and he just shut me down saying, "That's my job." It was an incredible adventure, one that really deserves a movie in itself, including even the sending of a picture with a newspaper by the people who had taken the objects to prove to me that, yes, they indeed had them. And of course, it turned into a ransom situation. And finally, in cooperation with the insurance company, that is what happened. And I received them all back, some damaged, with the exception of one gold item, which apparently they melted. It was, at the time, a devastating experience, but one learns you could get along without anything. And really, my life has been quite wonderful in spite of it. One of the most exciting projects I worked on was with the creation of Felicitas Hyman Yelidik for an exhibit entitled Journey to No End of the World. This was a highly original concept for an exhibition, creating 32 exhibit islands representing 32 Jewish communities through objects, photographs, and a literary quotation around the bottom. And the items were dispersed around an exhibit space, exploring the Jewish world. You could take a real journey from island to island. The display fixtures were an integral part of the thematic context of what was being shown. It really was an incredible development. This particular island is Afghanistan. The exhibit opened at the Vienna Jewish Museum, traveled to the Frankfurt Jewish Museum, flew to New York for the Yeshiva University Museum, and as its last station, came to Beit HaTfutzot, just a kilometer from my home in Ramat Aviv. A couple of months after the opening, I received a call early one morning from the local curator to come quickly to the museum, as a break-in had occurred during the night. I arrived to find that almost half of the 130 exhibited objects had been stolen. Luckily, when the police searched the area, they found a plastic bag under a bush containing some 25 objects, which apparently the thieves intended to come back to retrieve the next day. But 36 were gone, among the finest pieces in the collection. It was an inside job, as they say, as one of the security people of the museum fled Israel for Russia 3 days after the event, leaving behind his salary and his apartment. The police really worked hard, calling some 65 people for interviews, but nothing was resolved. To today, it seems that these objects were sucked up into a black hole. Not a hint has ever emerged as to their fate since the day of the robbery. I had to deal with thefts on other levels as well. This is an incident. This is an incident that happened in 2011. And as you can see from both the Hebrew, which says the Italian sting, and the top one in English, it involved a group of very precious objects that were stolen from the central synagogue in Milan. One Friday morning, I received a call from my friend Angelo Piatelli in Jerusalem, reporting to me that this theft had occurred the day before, alerting me to keep my eyes open. Not 4 hours later, I get a call from some dealers, good friends and honest people, who tell me they have to come and show me something incredible. Soon afterwards, there's a knock on the door, and they come in wheeling 2 suitcases. They open the suitcases, and they begin to take out these items, including what you see as a 17th century pair of Italian rimonim, worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and put them on my table. I knew that these were the items that had been stolen and informed them that the items were not leaving my house. These were stolen items. I called the shamash of the synagogue, whom I happened to know from the time he lived in Jerusalem, and told him that the items were found and safe, and then called a private detective, a good friend of mine, who had had some prior dealings with stolen Judaica. He came to the house, interrogated the 2 dealers, and we then called the police, took the items to be stored at the police. They got involved and set up for the following evening, when these dealers were to meet and pay the $300,000 involved in their purchase at a hotel in Jerusalem. They were wired, and when they went in and the thieves talked about the completion of the sale, the police came in and arrested them. It turned out to be 4 yeshiva students living in Jerusalem. One of them had been studying in Italy and attending services. And he noticed that every day after Mincha, the synagogue was emptied. The ark was left with a golden key in the lock, and everybody went away. He came back to Jerusalem, drafted his 3 friends. They went back, came to the synagogue in an afternoon with empty suitcases, passed the security of the synagogue, saying that they were just coming to say mincha before they were catching their flight home to Israel. And as soon as the worshipers left, they went and took the items from the ark, including the golden key. They then walked out, and of course, the guards thought they were with the same suitcases full of their clothes or belongings. They caught a train for Paris and took the first plane to Israel. Coming through security in Israel, they were stopped. And the evaluator for the customs said, "This is too big a deal for me." And he called down his boss. They managed to convince him that these were items from a private collection in Paris that were being brought back to Israel for repair, and they released them without even recording them. They then went to somebody that they knew who dealt with Judaica. It turned out that he really only dealt with manuscripts and books. And he called the two dealers who came to my house. They got together, made a deal, and that Friday morning they came to me. Obviously, it turned out well. The items were returned to the synagogue. And there was a lot of publicity in Italy. And when Lisa and I went to Italy the next time, our name was known among the Jewish community as the people who had saved these precious items from the Milan synagogue. There were several other incidents of other stolen items that we were involved in, not to be talked about now. A minor incident, but nonetheless an interesting one. In April of 2010, I got a call from Leah Holterman, an Israeli photographer living in Berlin, and she asked me if I would be willing to be featured in a magazine, an Italian magazine that was going to be about collectors. I said that I would, and after a few weeks, she showed up. And when I answered the door, she said, "You're William Gross?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I thought it was somebody else." Why? Because one of the wealthiest men in America is a William Gross, the Bond King of America. And he is a famous collector, not of Judaica, but of stamps and many other things that are worth millions of dollars. And when she went and looked up Judaica, found William Gross, and then put in William Gross, she got all these entries about me and about the man in New York. And it fascinated her that such an incredibly wealthy guy would be collecting Judaica. So eventually she came to the wrong guy, but she was already there. We spent an entire day to get this picture for the article in L'Uomo, a Vogue publication in Italy. It was an incredible experience. And I must say that I began to appreciate the difficulties of modeling. So, this sums up a number of things that have happened to me in my 56, now going on 57 years in Judaica. There are many, many more. But if we had a few hours, I would go into them, but it's enough. But all of these in the final analysis determined how I relate to these things. And I want to end by showing very briefly some of the principles that I hold dear. So, number one, philosophically speaking, Judaica belongs to the entire Jewish people. During my lifetime, I'm privileged to be a trustee. And because of the above, sharing is the natural state of being. Article of Faith 2. If I wish to learn, I must give before I receive. I can learn from everyone, and every day that passes without learning is a lost day and opportunity. Here I would say, for instance, that whoever comes to me, and often it's people who've never really seen Judaica before, from them I also learn. When somebody who doesn't know what it is looks at an object and tells me of his impressions, it gives me a new viewpoint, a new direction from which I can understand what this object represents. Article of Faith 3, Judaica objects should not be considered as art objects, but rather as documents of Jewish history. That does not obviate their function as art objects, but that isn't what makes them important. And the last one, and the key one, an article of faith. My father, of blessed memory, was in a business where they had to have satellite stores in different locations for dry cleaning and laundry. And when I would ask him how they chose where to put one, he would say there's 3 criteria: location, location, and location. And so I've modified this for my belief in Judaica. And it is context context and yet more context. Without that context, these items have no meaning. They have no significance. And it is only as cultural objects for the Jewish people and their relationship with the environments in which they lived that they can really speak to us. Thank you.
Is anybody still there?
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank
Is
you,
anybody
Bill.
still there? Anybody still
Yes, there are 151 people there. Thank you very much, Bill,
יישר כוח.
for this wonderful journey you shared with us.
תודה רבה
Thank
לך.
you, Bill.
תודה רבה.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Bill. That was very interesting.
Why
Thank you,
we
Bill.
did- why we
כולנו
lost
איתך.
you, Bill.
You
Thank
should
you.
publish another book.
If there are any questions, Bill, do you still have the energy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
For Judaica, hours and hours.
hours and hours. Fascinating story. Are there any questions? Comments?
Yeah, can I?
Hi, Eva.
Eva.
No, I'm so glad I
Yeah.
managed to cancel because it's 2 hours earlier here. I managed to cancel whatever I was doing, shift things around and be here with you. Amazing.
Wonderful.
So I just wanted to ask you, do you want to just for the benefit of everybody here, say what do you think is the oldest object that is in your collection?
Well, the oldest object in my collection is an amulet, something called an incantation bowl from Mesopotamia. In that area, from the 4th to the 6th centuries, the Jews were the I'm sorry? Jews were the magicians. And these incantation bowls, which are ceramic bowls with inscriptions in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Mandalayan, what's the name of the language that was spoken there locally, in amuletic inscriptions in a circular manner on the inside of the bowl down to the bottom. And they since the war in Iraq in 91, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them have come out of Iraq. I have two that I think are singularly important. One has perhaps the most aesthetic image of a spirit in the bottom of it. And the other one is one of 3 or 4 dated, which is dated to 478. And those are the earliest ones. From there, there's a big jump, which is to a manuscript from about 1300. And then to one of the oldest objects existing, one of the 10 oldest objects, a pair of Torah staves from the middle of the 15th century, beautiful carved wood pieces.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I understood well, Bill. Oh, I'm talking from...
I don't know if I explained well, Sonia.
No. Did you say the Jews were the magician as?
They were the magicians of the area.
And how do you know that?
Not just for Jews.
What do you mean by magicians?
They were the amulet makers.
Yeah, it's okay for amulet makers, but what do you mean by saying were the magician?
Okay, I meant amulet makers.
Ah, sorry. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much. Okay, then.
I'm sorry I wasn't clear.
Okay, sorry.
Bill?
The last one you bought?
Yes.
What is the last one you bought?
The one with the dated one.
Ah.
With the date of 478.
Okay, 78. Thank you.
Bill? Thank you. תודה רבה.
Any more questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Here, Bill?
I have a question too.
Of course, thank you so much. And Thank you so much for sharing with us. Really, you are so generous and really feel like you live a life, rich life of missions. Sorry for my English. If you understand me, I can speak in Hebrew. Can I?
No, but we have a large audience, so.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Your English is perfectly clear.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your generosity to share it with us. And it's really seemed that like you had a good appearance, bracha of Hashem, of the good Lord that lead you to the right places and to share it with us as first thing as education. And to hold these roots and to bring it to the young people, facing the young people. And I have another question. Do you have anything from Yemen by incident?
I have quite a number of things from Yemen, not just objects, but particularly, of course, manuscripts and color decorated manuscripts, which are a passion of mine from Yemen.
And from which period? Which period?
They're from the 17th through the 20th century. Wow,
it's really important. So my grandparents came from Yemen, so I might have a light through your collection, Bezrat Hashem. Thank you so much.
You're welcome to come and see them, and every page of every manuscript I have is photographed, so I would be happy to send you whatever interests you.
Thank you so much, and have a good life, a long good life with your beloved family, and happy Hanukkah.
Thank you, and I've already had a good long life.
Baruch Hashem, and more, and many more.
Okay.
Bill, thank you for just this wonderful talk. It's so nice to hear you.
See
you. My question is more about the future of the online version. Is the electronic version going to be available to everyone? And I hope so.
Of what? Of the
images that you're.
Oh, sure. I'm sure that they'll be available from Bar-Ilan. Will it not be?
Will it be available worldwide or only at the university?
No. It will be open for the entire
That is
world.
wonderful.
So you are, yes. It will take time for us. We
Yeah.
have a few issues, of course, but it will be there.
Okay. Thank you.
I still owe you a lot of information, Michelle.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hello, Bill.
Hi, how are you doing, Walters?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Bill.
Well, we just wanted to thank you.
Hi, Lisa.
Thank you so much we could have spent hours and hours more listening to you, but we just wanted to say that you, in a very large way, were very responsible for all the work that we've done, because when we published the Kennicott Bible, in those days it was completely uncharted territory. We knew absolutely nothing about anything, and then one day we got this phone call out of the blue from you, and you said you wanted to buy one of our Bibles, and we thought, oh, fantastic. And so then a few days later, a letter arrived.
A piece of paper, a scrap of paper.
With a scrap of paper in it. And I opened it and I said to Linda, oh, you remember that chap in Israel who said he wanted to buy one of our Bibles? He's changed his mind. He didn't want to buy one, he's bought 5. And, and I gave us such a huge amount of confidence. And you were one of our very, very, very earliest subscribers. And we've remained great friends with you ever since.
I know, but it's only because of the incredible dinners that Linda prepares when we're in London.
More are coming. You have to come and have some more.
Well, we just wanted to say how much we've really valued the friendship that we've had with you, and we've spent time together many times over many years, and we did a project with you together. And we've really enjoyed that. And just thank you very much.
Completely mutual, Michael.
Chag Sameach from us both.
Hello, Bill.
Go ahead.
Bill.
Yes.
It's Charlo.
Who am I hearing from?
Buzzy Porton.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Buzzy. Wow. I says, but believe me, of all the people who are on this, my relationship with Buzzy goes back to the middle 50s. I don't think there's anybody else there with whom what I can say that. Fantastic. A great scholar and a great person.
Oh, with
Hi, Alan. Oh, yes, another one. Yes. I'm sorry, Alan. I didn't mean to denigrate the length of our friendship.
We were in discussion way back about Idumean Ostrika, and there was this fellow Green, and you were supposed to be trying to get them, and you were his consultant, and nothing ever came of it. Why not?
Because it's a lost cause, Buzzy. Until they publish things themselves, they do not share them.
So of all the things that you've collected, you've not managed to collect any Idumean Ostrika.
No, I've left that to you and your cohorts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk, Bill.
Thank you, Buzzy. I appreciate
And
that.
regards to Lisa.
Okay.
Regards to you too.
Bill?
Bye-bye.
Bill, a quick question.
Sure. Oh, hi, Isaac. God, it's the second time this week, Isaac.
Second time this week, right. It's been wonderful. And I told you, I listened at midnight last week. I listened to your lecture at the National Library that you did in August. I couldn't sleep, and I figured, let me do some Judaica work. Just a quick question. What's the oldest Chevra Kadisha item that you have or that you have ever seen? And by the way, I also have an incantation bowl I bought from a soldier who served in Iraq in the first Bush War.
Yeah.
Which I'll send you a picture of.
That's a good question.
Okay, not important now. We can.
Isaac, when I was 70, I would have answered it on the spot. At 81, you got to give me a day. But I'll look it up and see what I have.
God bless you. I just turned 70, so I still remember something.
Okay. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, I want to say it's very nostalgic seeing a picture of Maurice and talking about Rosenberger. He was such a gentleman. A gentleman.
Absolutely.
Elegant. Yes. Thank you very much.
And Marcia, about amulets, you did the first real exhibition about them.
I saw it was in the catalog listing down at the bottom to the right. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all your help and friendship.
Sorry, I have a question too regarding amulets. It was mentioned that Jews were amulet makers.
Yes.
And I wonder whether they weren't amulet makers not only in Iraq or in the Maghreb, but all over the old world.
Yes.
That Jews were the amulet makers for almost any people in the old world. And I think that might have to do with the use of script. Jews were able to use script, a very particular script,
yes,
in difference to all the surrounding people, which very much were unable to read or to write. So it destined them to make amulets. And I wonder whether there has been an exhibit or could be an exhibit which shows this phenomenon.
I don't think that there has been. I haven't seen a lot of. There was a votive exhibit in New York last year or 2 years ago, which unfortunately I didn't get to see, which may have dealt on some of that because I didn't see the catalog. But I don't know. But I think that in the Christian world and in the Muslim world, because Jews were the source of Islam and Christianity, they were looked on to some degree of being the original people of God, as it were, the people of the book, the people of the Bible. And therefore they had, I know in the Maghreb, certainly there was a great deal of cooperation between Jewish and the Arab Muslim amulet makers, but even today, a friend who's a rabbi in Fez, Muslims are lined up at his door all the time because he's considered a powerful maker of amulets.
Bill?
Yes.
Thank you, Amy.
Barbara.
Hi, Barbara.
How are you? I'm curious because you know I have a lovely collection of Buddhist Tibetan amulets.
Oh, yes.
And one of my favorites, I don't have this one, but I've got the book that contains it, is a prayer for protection while committing a crime. Was there anything like that in Jewish amulets?
I am sure that somewhere there is, Barbara. I don't know of it, but the range of the reasons for Jewish amulets, well, most of them were for protection at birth, the vast majority. But I'm sure there would have been one also written for that. There's some really powerful black magic ones, and not that there's a lot, because there aren't a lot. But I don't know what one. I've seen so many different amulets for so many different purposes that I would have never thought about. That it's certainly not ever, but that's a wonderful idea. Can you send me the wording?
Yes.
That I would like to see.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a marvelous book of amulets from the area and the prayers, so I will send you that.
Yofi, thank you.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
I did understand that the researcher in Qumran said that maybe the first mezuzot were kind of amulets.
Well, I mean, I believe they are, yes. I don't think you would find many ultra-Orthodox people who would agree with you in that thing. They might understand the protective value, but I don't think they see it that way. But that's a whole nother philosophical area that I get into very often with my many religious friends. But
hey, Bill,
yeah.
This is absolutely fabulous and fascinating. Great to see you looking so well. I wonder if you could tell us what happened to with your collection in the museum of the Bible in Washington.
Oh, they're exhibiting a number of pieces that they purchased, and the rest is down in Oklahoma City in their warehouses, and they appreciate it, and I appreciated it. It's that's more or less the end of it.
May I ask a question, please? This is Shoma from Chicago.
Yes, I recognize you, Shoma. How are you doing?
Nice to see you. I'm obviously, as you know, completely new to Judaica. The first I heard of it was last week.
But I expect that you will integrate it into your environmental projects immediately.
This is all about you. I found it very fascinating, but there's a book. It's called History of the World in 100 Objects.
Yes.
I thought it would be so lovely if you would perhaps consider, as a catalog or something, your history in 100 objects, because you already have the objects, but then you could put it in context for someone like me who knows nothing about Judaica, but is very intrigued. It would be so fascinating to learn your context, because it's all context. The story you tell about the amulet, that the Muslims come to the rabbi for an amulet, it just brings each object to such a richer depth. That would be something I think a lot of people who are not familiar with Judaica would absolutely value, and it would be a wonderful resource to even people who are very, very scholarly and academic in this.
There is a book of the 100 objects of Judaica.
But your context, because you put it in such a humanist term, which is so
I doubt that, after there being one like that idea, that any publisher would be particularly interested. But to me, it would be very interesting, because I really try to get as the contextual approach is not only for Jews to understand their relationship to the environment that they lived in, but also for the people in the environment to understand the influences that they had on a minority living within their culture, and the mutual, because there's lots of evidences of Jewish influences as well on the surrounding peoples, you know, in the midst of whom they lived. So the idea is a nice one, Shoma. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Where are we? Ilya?
They went home.
Yes.
Yeah. I think everybody's tired.
Probably.
Bill, honey, this is Jessica. I just want to tell you thank you, thank you, thank you. This was just such a stimulating, wonderful evening. Thank you.
But I return the thank you with equal sincerity and force, yes.
Mr. Gross, sorry, did you mention what was the first object that you started with the lifetime collection?
Yeah, I showed a picture of this very small spice box.
What was it? I didn't hear, sorry.
A spice box.
Ah, okay, thank you, sorry.
Bill, what was the last thing?
Oh, the last thing was a book.
A book?
Yeah, I haven't bought objects in some time.
It's not the last, will be more.
Books are
Bill Irvangar here in California. Thanks for all your recent help on Sefer Raziel. Immensely.
Yeah, that's great. That was terrific to learn that you've done that for your son. Really, Irv, that's terrific.
Thanks, Bill.
I hope he appreciates it as well.
We got another year to wait.
Okay, then we'll see.
Bill, I don't think people are tired. I think they're just amazed, and it's a lot to take in. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed it very much. Every time I go and prepare a lecture, of course, you learn something new about the subject that you're preparing because you're
favorite subject.
Yeah.
This was a different kind of lecture than I heard you give on conferences. Yes. It was much more personal, and I think that it's wonderful how many people you brought together from all different parts of the world, and it feels a little bit like a family. You know, they're all connected through Judaica, through interest in Jewish art, through your work. And it creates a community. And this is, I think.
Oh no, I said it was easy. I said to each of them that if they join, they get $100.
Okay. You want my address?
They get or give.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No,
I think we should wrap it up here. Ilya, are you with us? Okay, so thank you, Bill, very much. It was a wonderful, wonderful evening. Whoever is in the Israeli zone or morning in different areas. And I'm very happy that it happened at our department, that we gave you the room to do it.
Well,
So
there's a definite reason for that. You're not the only remaining university department of the world for no reason, Miriam.
Thank you. Thank you. It all was recorded, so you will get the recording.
Where can we see it? Where can we see it?
Well, we will send the recording to Bill, and he can send to whoever he wants. Okay.
Thank you. That would be great.
Yes, I try to. My name is Wiet Gans. I'm a collector from Amsterdam, as Bill very well knows.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's presenting yourselves as if we've never had any contact is strange, Wiet.
Yes, indeed. And as you can see, I'm moving the collection.
Yeah.
Maybe you can look behind me. My room is nearly empty now.
Yeah, I can see.
And I have to move it because we are thinking in the coming years to move with the store Premsland Hamburger at the Rokin. And
yeah, you wrote to me. I was really to some degree upset. I mean, that's an institution.
Yeah, no.
And for those of you who are still watching, Wiet Gans and family have one of the oldest still existing collections and important objects that are totally unique in the world of Judaica. Simply incredible things.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. And I have very good memories also from Mr. Fleursheim, which I visited often in the former house in Zurich.
Yeah.
And we spoke Dutch, of course, with him because he was Dutch, and his mother lived in the Minerva-Laan, not far from where I live. And so I'm a little bit aware of what I'm doing, and I think it's a very good idea for moving, but in the virus time it's a bit hard, so we leave it as it is. For the moment, we will one day hope to rent it out. And it was very good to see you, and I wish you happy Hanukkah. I wish everybody happy Hanukkah, and I hope to hear from you where I can see maybe on YouTube it all because I had to go be in the store, and I made the difference in time also. So I forgot.
I will send it to you, Viti, with pleasure.
Okay, thank you, Will. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay. Hi, Teresa. Good to see you.
Miriam, Ilya, V, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. It was great.
Miriam, if you can also preserve and send me the... Hi, Sarah. Hi, Yonat. Hi, every Zoom meeting, we have to stop meeting like this, Yonat.
Hi.
Yeah.
You can tell him that I am the wife of the Fleursheim he was talking about.
Yes, indeed. Very much so. Miriam, if you could possibly also copy the chat and
yes,
send that
I'll
to me,
save it. Everything will be saved.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all, and I wish you all a happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Bye.
Purim Sameach.